So there were a few of my favorites for my very first photo walk this September, and I think in total I must have done about 24 photo walks this month, which is crazy. I think I did like 3, 4, sometimes even up to 5 photo walks a week. And I do most of them locally. I shoot all around the city where I live, which is The Hague here in the Netherlands. And because I shoot locally, there really is a lot of opportunity. It's much easier to go out for just an hour or an hour or two when I can spare it. And I've been enjoying myself so much that I really wanted to share with you some of the reasons why I shoot locally and maybe why you would want to try that as well if you don't already. So I'm going to share with you 7 reasons to shoot locally while showing you more of my photography from this month as well. So I hope you enjoy. So your first reason to shoot local is the fact that you know the area best. You know the hotspots in your area, but you also know the not so hotspots in your area. The places that are less obvious, less popular perhaps. And this gives you a unique advantage over anyone else that's not from your area. You may not have mountains, waterfalls, intriguing skylines or any other spectacular scenes in your area, but you know what is there. As for me in the area where I live, there's pretty much none of what I just mentioned. We don't have mountains, we don't have cliffs, waterfalls or any of that stuff here in the Netherlands, and certainly not so where I live in The Hague, which is a rather big city, at least so from a local perspective, and there's no wilderness or anything here. However, we are directly on the coast, which is quite unique for a big city. We also have a few small but interesting nature reserves around, and both the city center and various neighborhoods that have nice old buildings or newer ones and combinations of both. We have the Dutch Parliament that's housed here, and there's quite some history to this city. So some of those places are quite popular amongst tourists and they do get busy at times, but knowing and frequenting the area, I also know when those spots aren't so busy. And I know from experience when there might be great light and so on. Just by being present when I'm going out about my daily routines, I often spot where the light looks great at a certain time of day, and I take notes of the things that I like. Furthermore, I run into spots that aren't in any of the tourist folders. Places that may not look all that interesting during the middle of the day, but turn into great photo locations at dusk or dawn or when it is foggy or whatever. Knowing the area well and experiencing it during all those kinds of conditions and at different times of the day gives you such an advantage. And that brings us to the second reason to photograph where you are, the unique perspective you have. Now, we've all drooled over these so-called honeypot locations, and they're called honeypot locations for a reason, obviously. And while it's fun to visit spots like that from time to time, they don't necessarily add a very unique perspective to your photography if that's all of the locations you shoot. Instead, photographing right where you are, whether it's an urban environment or out in nature nearby, gives you instantly something very unique, something that other photographers in other places don't have. And it may be hard at first because wherever you are may be so familiar to you that it's hard to see what's interesting about it. It might seem dull, especially compared to some of those honeypot locations that I mentioned. But really, to all of us, not from where you are, it's very interesting to see photos from your area. I personally follow a lot of photographers on social media, both on Instagram for example and here on YouTube, and only very few of them are photographers that mostly shoot these honeypot locations. We all know some examples of what those are, whether it's photography on Iceland or the forests in Madeira or any other of these popular places. And the reason is not because I don't think their photography is beautiful. The reason is just I don't have to see like 50, 100 photos a week from those same locations. So there's a few whose photography I really appreciate, through which I then see those locations. But other than that, I am really mostly interested in photographers who share work from wherever they are. And that can really be from wherever in the world. I love seeing places that I'm just not familiar with. And that doesn't need to be spectacular at all. I follow photographers who do street photography in smaller cities or in their local woodland, without spectacular mountain backdrops. I think what photography makes interesting is not necessarily the scene you have, although of course it might help, but more so what you are able to see in it as a photographer and how you are able to capture it. So I really want to challenge you to try and see your own area through the eyes of everyone else that's not from that area. So next, shooting locally is very budget friendly. Now, photography can be quite an expensive hobby in itself. All of the gear we're using, next to a camera and lenses and everything else you need to photograph, you might need walking gear, hiking gear, tripods, whatever else you might need, and that adds up really quickly. However, when you have to travel a lot to go to places to photograph, then it really starts to add up quickly. Perhaps you're going away for a weekend somewhere or even longer. There's cost for traveling there, there's cost for staying there. If you might be going to restaurants for dinner there, you might stay in a hotel or somewhere else overnight. But instead, if you shoot locally, you're cutting away pretty much all of those travel costs. Depending on where you are, of course, and how you get around, you still might be spending a little bit on gas. If you use a car, for example. I personally live in a city where it's quite easy to get around on a bicycle. I can go on a bicycle in the city center to most neighborhoods in the city. I can go on a bicycle to a few local nature reserves, so that's really nice. So for me, there's no real added cost at all, which makes shooting locally very budget friendly. And either way, whether you are using a car and do have to spend some money on gas, for example, it's still much cheaper than if you travel further, and certainly so if you would be staying overnight. So the fourth reason to photograph wherever you are is the fact that there's much more photography opportunities. So like I mentioned, local spots are easier to reach. It doesn't cost much to get there, which probably means you can go there much more often. Now, I don't know about you, but between a job and a family with 2 kids, I don't have an awful lot of time on my hands to go away for longer periods of time. I can't just leave an entire day in a weekend, for example, at least not every week. I certainly can't go on multiple day trips that often, but I still like to do photography as much as I can. So what I do is squeeze in an hour here and there, maybe 2 hours whenever I can. Certainly in this time of the year that goes quite well. The sun is getting up a little bit later than in the summer, which makes it a bit more relaxed to go out at sunrise, but still early enough to do it before work or before having to bring my children to school, for example. And it sets sort of an hour or two after dinner time, which means that I can easily go after dinner for a walk, or maybe even bring my kids along, because they do sometimes like to come along with me as well. So because I don't have to travel that far and I don't really have to spend much either, I can just go whenever there's a little bit of time, and depending both on the conditions and how much time I have at hand, I can go very nearby or a little bit further, but always within a bicycle distance of like 20 minutes or something. And that really helps for me to spend a lot of time on my hobby that I otherwise definitely would not have. So the fifth reason to shoot wherever you are is that it helps you to gain an instant audience. So tying in to that unique perspective that I mentioned earlier, shooting locally really helps set you apart from what other people are doing. It also makes it very clear to others sort of what you have to offer, and whether you're just sharing your photography for fun on social media, for example, or you're doing some commercial work, it's very clear to people what you are offering. And the fact that you are offering something unique really helps set you apart and makes it much easier to sell prints, to sell other stuff. While if you were doing a lot of what I've called these honeypot location photography, you have a lot of competition. It's much harder to differentiate. You'd have to be either extremely good or have a very unique perspective to those locations to gain some attention at all, and definitely also to sell prints or to do anything else with your work. Whereas it's much easier to find a niche shooting wherever you are. And people may love your local area for dozens of reasons. I found that people follow me or buy my prints because they are in the same area as I am, and they like something from where they know it. But there's also people who may have lived here for a while or visited here before, or in fact because they find it very exotic as it is so different as to where they are in their part of the world. So again, at first it may be hard to really realize this if you're so familiar to your own area and to see it through the eyes of others who are not familiar with where you are. But really, there's a lot of people who definitely will be interested in wherever you are if you start to really get into your local area and to capture it in a unique way and to share it with the world. So the next reason to shoot wherever you are is the local community. I have found that when you more often visit the same places, you'll start running into people who might do the same, whether it's in real life at those locations or on social media. When you find other people who are shooting in the same area, you start paying attention to each other's work, and after some time maybe start hanging out with a few local photographers to go out together or just get inspiration from where others are going. And I find that super valuable. Now, most often I personally do go out by myself. I think that's probably when I do my best photography, because I find that I'm more focused to my surrounding. But I also found that I do really like to go out with others to photograph. And in the past few years, I've started to organize local photo walks, just free. It's just getting together with some people. I used to post on my Instagram stories, I'm going out next week, is anyone interested in coming along? And sometimes no one was at first, and later on more people started to join occasionally, and that has been really fun. So I've met literally dozens of people who are also into photography, who live in the city or nearby, and I think that's just so cool. There's so many people now that if I want to go out with someone else, there's always someone who's willing to join. And we now have a local WhatsApp group where anyone can just post if they're going out for a photo walk and if anyone wants to join. And sometimes that might just be 2 people or 3 people or even up to 8 as we had last week. And it's just so much fun. You learn to see what others photograph, what they're interested in, just location wise, but also on location. For example, I've been doing a little bit more street photography lately, which is something I'm really not that familiar with. So having done a few photo walks with other photographers who are more experienced in that, and being able to see the things that catch their attention and learning from them that way has been really valuable to me, because you learn so much quicker if you have examples nearby and people can give you tips and tricks and so on. So the final reason to photograph locally is that it really gives you a new appreciation for where you are. So doing a lot of photography in my local area means I also think a lot about all of these different spots and places in the city and in nature around the city, that I'm sort of constantly very aware of everything that's on offer here. I'm always taking these mental notes of that place might be interesting, or I should look there at sunrise or sunset, for example. And it's making me much more aware of what's good about where I live. I mean, it's not that before I didn't really appreciate where I live, but scouting all these places and visiting so many spots around the city is really strengthening that appreciation for where I live for me, because I get to see so much of the good stuff of it, and it gives me a lot of positive thoughts about where I am, which really adds to my happiness of being here. So I would say that it makes me feel even more connected to where I am, and that really adds to the value of living, I guess. So there you are, that's 7 reasons to photograph wherever you are. And I guess there might be many more reasons to photograph wherever you are. This is by no means an extensive list, but I hope I've given you 7 very good reasons to either start photographing locally or do more of it or continue doing it. Perhaps it's something you already do a lot as well. I think personally shooting locally is something I've always done, perhaps just not so intentionally as I do now. And I also think that for a long time I feel somewhat, perhaps, I wouldn't say embarrassed, but feeling that what I do might be less interesting than what people were doing on all those honeypot locations, for example. I guess I felt at times, that maybe once I get the opportunity, I should start to travel more and then get like really good pictures of really good places. But in recent years, I've really embraced what I'm doing. And even when I do travel and I do photograph in other places on my travels, I do enjoy that. I think it's really good. And yet I do prefer to shoot, right here where I am in The Hague, around the city, in local nature. It's just really what I like best. I feel so connected to where I am. And I guess it's not just photography, it's the whole experience of going to familiar places and revisiting them over the seasons, over the years, see how things change, how things stay the same. I just find that very, very intriguing and interesting. And to be honest, I never get bored with it. I never get bored visiting the same places because conditions are always different. So yeah, I hope that's something you may relate to. And I would definitely say, please don't feel like wherever you are is less interesting to photograph than anywhere else, because that's really not true. And if you've got any photography to share from wherever you are, please do share it in the comments below. If you have an Instagram account that you can link, for example, I'd love to see wherever you are and what you photograph there. And if you want to see more of my local photography, I'll also share my own Instagram in the description below, so you can see more of that. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe for more videos on local photography, on photography on a budget, as well as tips and reviews of the gear that I use. See you next time. Bye!